Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's webinar. My name is Jason Howe. I'm going to start the presentation now, and I'll do some welcomes and introductions from ourselves and get into the agenda of what we're going to cover this evening. As the webinar is ongoing, please feel free to put any questions that you may have in the questions tab, and my colleague David will be monitoring that behind the scenes, and then we will also cover them in the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So this is what we're going to cover essentially today. Please, as I mentioned previously, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll do some welcome and introduction and introduce you to the construction and BSc team who's working on the qualification wheels project at City and Guilds. We'll likely touch base on why things have transformed and how that came about. And then moving on, we're going to have a look at some of the level 3 qualification content before moving on to the summary of the assessments that will be contained within the new level 3 qualification. And then moving on from that, we will look at the employer confirmation guide and what steps you may want to take next. And then we will finish off to answer any questions that you may have at the end of the webinar. So apologies, just by way of some introductions. My name is Jason Howe, I'm a technical advisor at City and Guilds for construction. And as mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague David Pye, who is a technical advisor for building services. We are usually joined by our other technical advisor colleague Ian Roberts, but unfortunately Ian is unable to join us on this webinar today. And we're also usually joined and accompanied by our colleague Anne Harrod Lloyd-Bindon, who is the Policy Stakeholder and Partnership Manager at City and Guilds. And essentially that is your construction and BSc team for our Skills for Wheels project here at City and Guilds. Pardon. So why did the transformation come about? So we're just going to lightly touch on this. You may be aware of this and how it came about, but I think it's important that we just touch on it and cover it anyway. So the Skills for Wheels qualification Wales conducted a review essentially in February 2018 of all of the construction qualifications and training that was available to centres and employers and learners in Wales. There was 3 key findings what came out of that review, and those were that some of the assessment practices were inconsistent, some areas of the learning weren't effectively assessed enough, and learners were needing to deal with a wider range of tasks and problem solving that was than what was required for the skills needs of Wales. So essentially through the review they came up with a new outline structure content of some new qualifications which would ensure that these met the skill needs of Wales, but also aligned themselves to reduce the complexity of the system with reducing the number of qualifications, but also making sure that there was clear pathways and improving the coherence and progression routes for learners through FE courses onto essentially apprenticeship frameworks and then either into employment or HE. And another key part was that the qualifications that were needed developing were portable, not just in and around Wales, but also beyond the borders. So that's essentially why the change and why these new qualifications have come about. So we're now just going to have a little look at some of the level 3 qualification content and what's contained within them. So on the screen there, I'm going to direct you, if I may, to the columns on the right hand side that's highlighted with the titles in blue. Now these are the new level 3 qualifications, and you see the trades that they cover in construction, and City and Guilds are responsible for those construction qualifications. Our colleagues at AAL, they are responsible for the building service and engineering qualifications as highlighted on the screen. So we have a differentiated split between responsibilities within these qualifications, but also the list of qualifications that fall within the remit of the new transformation. As I'm going to move you now to the left hand side where it says foundation and core. Now this is what a learner will do when they attend college on a full-time course as a new entrant. They will do what we call the foundation qualification, and contained within that is a series of units that cover the mandatory elements, and then also learners undertaking this qualification would essentially pick 2 trade areas. Now, the reason it's also called the core is because as part of the apprenticeship framework, if the learner hasn't already achieved the foundation, when they do an apprenticeship, they must complete the core and the core assessments. The only exempt from this if they previously completed a level 2 qualification, either in college or a level 2 apprenticeship. But by completing the core, the learners will undertake only one trade specialism in that, and obviously it will be aligned with their apprenticeship. So obviously if it was a site carpenter, they would do the wood occupations route as part of the core qualification. None of the others, it's not relevant. Next in the middle, we have the progression qualification. Now again, for the progression, these are the responsibilities lie with City and Guilds for construction and EAL for building services. But again, the progression routes are shown on screen, and these also naturally map into the apprenticeship. So if a learner has done the foundation and progression, they are exempt from some of the assessments contained within the level 3. So it makes that learner journey much more worthwhile. Pardon me. So just to move on to the summary of assessments now. So how are learners going to be assessed on the level 3? So on the level 3, we have 3 main assessments. Now these are summative assessments, and these are all conducted usually towards the end of the learner's journey on the qualification program. Now the on-screen assessments, these can be completed at any point during the learner's program and during the apprenticeship. And there are essentially 2 tests on there, test 1 and test 2. And these contain roughly 45 questions, and they will take approximately 70 minutes to complete, and they're online. They're externally set by us at City and Guilds, and the results are received by the centre usually the same day. Through the first round of exams, they will have to go through a moderation process, so that may incur a delay in releasing the results to the centres. Recognition of prior achievement can be gained for the test 1, as I mentioned previously. So if you've taken on an apprentice who may have done the progression qualification, they will be exempt from test 1 as part of the level 3 assessment. So that's the knowledge tests. Then we have the practical project. Now these are work-based tasks, so this assessment is conducted in your workplace or on site, wherever they may be working, and the training provider will collaborate with you in order to arrange that. The training provider will provide an assessor who will also internally mark it against a set of criteria that's outlined in the assessment pack. This will go through both a centre's own quality assurance, but also it will be subject to our own external verification, or another word for that is external quality assurance. And the centre will provide provisional marks for the learner, and we will award the final marks after the assessments have gone through our own internal moderation. And that is a process that must be followed in line with our regulators' requirements. Following on from that, we have the professional discussion. Now, this is the last assessment that the learners will undertake, and they must complete the practical project and also the employer confirmation guide and sign-off, which I'll come on to shortly, before they commence the professional discussion. So, in essence, it's likely that the centre and the learner and yourselves will probably complete these assessments in that sequential order as shown on the screen, starting with the on-site assessment, onto the practical project, and then finishing off on the professional discussion. Pardon me. As it moves on, throughout the programme, there is an employer confirmation or employee confirmation guide, or employer sign-off as it's often known as well. And this guide is there to allow learners to generate and create documented evidence, and all of this evidence goes to prove and be mapped and referenced against the occupational competency statements that are set out in the employer confirmation guide. And all mandatory components of the employer confirmation guide must be followed. This must also be complete before the learner is booked in for their final assessment, which is a professional discussion. Obviously, once the learner has successfully completed the employer confirmation guide and had it signed off by yourselves, and they've completed the relevant assessments, they are then able to apply for and attain their relevant competency card. With regards to the qualifications, they are graded pass, merit or distinction. And again, as I mentioned previously, provisional grades will be issued for the practical project, and that will undergo internal quality assurance, but it will be subject to external quality assurance. With regards to the professional discussion, what I forgot to mention previously, and apologies for this, the professional discussion will be conducted by ourselves as an assessment and awarding organisation. And the people that will do these professional discussion with the apprentices are trade specific people. So if you're a bricklaying organisation with bricklaying apprentices, it will be a bricklayer assessor who will be conducting that professional discussion with your learners. And with regards to our external assessors, they will confirm the grade of the professional discussion. Not on the day, because obviously the assessors will need to go back and reflect and make sure that the grade they are awarding is in line with the learners' responses. And then finally, the final grade will be issued by ourselves at City and Guilds for construction and colleagues at EAL for BSc. If a learner is unfortunate and may fail one of the assessment components, they are permitted to do a resit. And what we ask is that there needs to be sufficient feedback and support given to that learner in order to prepare them again for a resit of whichever assessment that may be. And any guidance that you want to have a look at with regards to resits can be found in our assessment pack. And all of the documents, the assessments packs, the qualification handbook and the employee confirmation guide can all be found on the Skills for Wales website. And if you haven't already, I would certainly recommend that you pay that website a visit just to familiarise yourself with the layout and have a look at the assessment pack or employee confirmation guide, just to familiarise yourself with it. As we move on, apologies, these are some additional vocational units that you may want your apprentices to undertake. But it is imperative that if they are going to undertake these units, that they are given exposure to the type of works that's required. And these are around the heritage skills that was requested. So they are there as an addition. They're certainly not mandatory, but if you would like your apprentices and your learners to undertake these units throughout their apprenticeship, then please just liaise with the provider and they can ensure that the learners are actively assessed against these units and criteria. And the units have been added to the relevant employee confirmation guide as well. So they're all in that pack, all in one place. But again, they are optional, certainly not mandatory, but maybe a good addition to your apprentice and the apprenticeship that they wish to undertake. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague, David Pye, who is going to take you through the next set of slides, including the employer confirmation guide. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Jason. So if we can move on. So the employer confirmation guide, this is where employers will be involved in some of the awareness around the range of skills required by the candidate as they work through the whole of the apprenticeship. So, as it says on the slide there, the employers will have an enhanced role in the delivery of the new apprenticeship qualifications in construction and the built environment. So what is the purpose of the employer confirmation sign-off? Excuse me. It's to provide centres and the trade bodies with the assurance that the candidate is occupationally proficient and has covered a full range of relevant standards. We'll show you how this looks in the following slides, but the collection of evidence allows the centre to check that the employer confirmation is valid and there is an audit trail to support the signing off and those decisions. There is a lot more information in our welcome pack and in our employer confirmation sign off. But if we can move on to the next slide, please, Jason. This is a further overview of the confirmation guide and the certain roles within it. So the employer role will be to support and work with the learner throughout the apprenticeship. The apprentice will log the type of work that they're doing, and you'll have a sign-off sheet to sign when the learner's been operating at a competent or a level that is proficient, should I say, on those range of tasks. The actual sign-off itself will be an employer confirmation. You will sign it, you will initial and sign certain parts. That will form a complete document at the end. The centres will work with employers because the employers will need to know the type of activities and where to sign and what document is available. So we have an 8-step guide, and there's a few certain pinpoints on there that I'll discuss. And the role of the awarding organisation is to carry out quality assurance that the processes and due processes have been followed throughout this confirmation guide. And next slide, please, Jason. So that's how the confirmation guide looks like. So they're just some snips, but we'll have a deeper look on the following slides, please, Jason. So here we have the first section. So section 1 is completed by the candidate. So it's typical information you're likely to see on documents: the apprentice name, the registration number, the centre name, and so on. And then section 2, as it says, completed by the employer when the learner has completed all the statements within Form B. And we'll show you Form B in a moment. Just click on, please, Jason. Section 3 there is completed by the employer and the IQA at the centre once all the statements outlined in Form B are completed. Apologies, we are presenting these webinars from home, so please excuse any unwanted background noise. Next slide, please, Jason. So the Employee Confirmation Guide Form B, this shows you the actual type of criteria and experiences the learners should be gaining whilst operating it out in industry. And there's opportunities there to tick off when the learner has been completing those type of activities. So it's a simple list of activities and checklist. Any questions, please type them in as we're chatting. And the continued part there is where the employer will just put the company name and employee name. Next slide, please, Jason. I think Jason covered this slightly before. There's typically 15 pieces of evidence to support the confirmation sign-off. We're looking for lots and lots of evidence, but just some examples are there to support the occupational competency statement. So workplace documentation like job cards, some video clips, site diaries. There's a whole range that you may be familiar with because they are very similar to what we've used previously on NVQ style qualifications. But next slide, please, Jason. So here's the 8-step guide that we mentioned just before. There's a couple that I'll just pick out really. So step 2 is when the provider, the centre, meets with the employer and identifies a range of tasks. So it's at the very early stages you'll be introduced to this sign-off, and you'll see the type of activities a learner will have to experience. I'll jump ahead a couple there. Step 4, periodic reviews of the apprentice's progression. So at certain times, as the learner progresses through, you'll have the opportunity to have a review and see how the learner is coping with a range of activities and have that discussion with the centre. And then step 6, a final review meeting. So at some stage, we want to know that the learner's completed all the experiences before we start to progress them into the final stages of their assessment, which includes the professional discussion and the project. And next slide, please, Jason. So here's one that's been filled in just as an exemplar. So you can see that we've written in names, the apprentice registration number, and then there's part of the Form B being completed. And on this page, it's been signed off. You'll see there's a couple of employers or responsible people they're working with as part of their employment. So it may not always be just one person, maybe 2, 3, or even more, but we can capture all of the responsible people on this document. The next slide, please, Jason. And there's just some examples of the evidence. So we don't want it to be large amounts of evidence, but we're suggesting a type of site diary that the learner may use, and to include some videos. So it's a good modern way to present evidence. So it doesn't have to be a full video of 6 hours. It could be the first 10 minutes, a snip in the middle of a few more minutes, and then some recording at the end as the learners are just finishing off. So this example is plastering. So there may be some sections of videos, there may be some supporting photographs, and just an indication of what the task was. And in the example on the right-hand side at the bottom, you'll see where a learner's put in a video link. So you don't see anything as such, you have to click the link, but they've also time-stamped it. So if anyone looking at the quality assurance of this wants to have a look as part of a sample, they can go directly to those certain points that the learner had that experience. Next slide, please, Jason. So the employee confirmation guide example. So again, we're just showing the company name, and there may be more than one company across the apprenticeship, or there may be different employees taking responsibility. We're just showing that they're being signed off at the end, along with a quality assurer from the training provider, which you can see on the bottom row there. Thank you, Jason. So hopefully that makes sense, and it's put your mind at ease. It's not a massive document or a massive amount of work over the course of an apprenticeship. I'm sure you'll find it quite helpful and usable, an intuitive document. But if you've got any questions, please type away in the questions tab whilst I pass you back over to my colleague, Jason. Thanks very much, Jason.
Thank you, David. Yes, thank you, colleagues, as well. What I'm going to do now is take you through the next steps and sort of future material that you may want to certainly start and have a look at, and especially when you're discussing certain things with your providers. So with regards to our Skills for Wheels website, as I mentioned previously, if you haven't already, please pay it a visit. This is a bespoke website for the construction and BSc qualifications in Wales, and all of the information is contained on that website, as well on the dedicated web pages for the individual trades or whichever qualification that the learners may be working towards. On the website, there are assessment packs, qualification handbooks, and the employer confirmation guides, and all of that is on the website for your pleasure and viewing. With regards to durations, we've been asked this question quite a lot. Now, as an awarding organisation, we provide guided learning hours against the qualifications. How the centres and yourselves as employers wish to deliver that guided learning hours is entirely yours and their prerogative. We don't set durations. What we do, and what our colleagues at Skills for Wales and Qualification Wales do, is we provide typical durations. But again, every learner has to be treated as an individual, and any prior learning and achievements would need to be taken into account when we start looking at durations. But on the screen there, we've just provided a few examples of what they may look like. So a new entrant learner who's got no previous experience comes into the apprenticeship now. For this purpose, we're looking at the bottom line, and they would typically be on an apprenticeship for approximately 3.5 years, because they would cover the core qualification and their level 3 qualification as part of their apprenticeship. Now, that is just a typical duration. It's not set in stone, if you like. And the duration that you agree, that you discuss and then agree between yourselves and the training provider. If a learner's done the foundation qualification previously and spent a year doing that, the duration then on the apprenticeship might be 2 years and X amount of months. But again, it should really be in line with the length of time that a new apprentice would take overall. So with the foundation and the apprenticeship, it should combine to at least 3.5 years approximately. And then similarly with the progression. So obviously the more the learners achieve previously, that will reduce their duration on the apprenticeship. But what is imperative is that the learner gets the relevant and sufficient amount of time in the workplace to develop those vocational and occupational skills that they need to operate effectively, proficiently, and competently in the workplace. So those are some typical durations, and you will get this presentation after today's webinar, so please feel free to revisit this. What we've got listed here is some of the webinars that we have delivered recently. If you go to our Skills for Wales page and you go to our events section under training and events, you can register for future webinars that we may put on. This is the last employer confirmation guide or employer webinar that we are delivering for this series, but we may be looking to deliver more in the August and September time. But if you do have any queries, there is an email address at the end of this presentation that you're more than welcome to contact and get in touch with us if you have any questions or queries. But also on that training and events page, they will have as well recorded webinars that we've done previously if you want to have a look, and also copies of today's presentation as well. But that will be followed up with an email after today's webinar. And also on the screen there, it's just a list of the recent webinars that we have been doing with providers. We did one earlier today, and then we have our final two, one tomorrow and one next week. So we are trying to provide guidance and support to both our centres and employer stakeholders with the delivery of the new level 3 qualification. I'm now going to give some time to for people to start typing in any questions that they may have. Whilst people are doing that, I am going to cover a few questions that we have ourselves. So I will cover them on the next slide, and then I'll return to answer any questions that you may have following that. So these are just some of the common questions that have come through previously, and we just thought we would share them to give you guys peace of mind as well, and to know what to expect when you're having those discussions with your providers and colleges. So does the employer have to be a qualified assessor? No, the employer is not making any assessment decisions. The assessments are summative assessments which are conducted at the end, and they're conducted by qualified assessors. With regard to this, the employer is confirming that the learner is proficient and consistently working at a good standard, but they are not making any assessment decisions. So hopefully that puts your mind at ease at that. Do we have to check if the employer is qualified? So this is a question basically on behalf of that a training provider supplied. Essentially, no. No one's ever checked before, and there is no need to check moving forward as well. So although we want learners to be working with reputable and experienced tradespeople, there is no requirement to go hunting out CVs and getting certificates out the drawers and stuff. There's no expectation that the centre will be checking if the employees are qualified. Is there an NVQ? Hot topic. There is no NVQ in these new construction qualifications. NVQs are still there, they're still live, and they're still in Wales, but they do not form any part of the new apprenticeship framework, and certainly don't form any part of the new level 3 qualifications. The NVQs still have a purpose currently, and they are to serve adult workers and people like that who need to utilise that those type of qualifications in order to demonstrate their vocational competence. But there is no NVQ in the new qualifications. How much evidence is needed? David touched on this previously in a previous slide, but to basically outline it, on page 4, our employee confirmation guide basically covers what David mentioned earlier about the different types of evidence and typically how many pieces of evidence would be needed. And then he also showcased the diary as well, which is a fantastic format for learners to start documenting their evidence and keeping it all in one place. Is the employer sign-off or confirmation guide part of the qualification? Essentially, no, it's not. Now, although the employer confirmation guide or employer sign-off is aligned to the assessment, i.e. the employer sign-off and confirmation guide needs to be complete before the professional discussion is even booked, it does not form part of the qualification. The employer confirmation guide and sign-off is simply there to allow for successful learners upon completion of all their assessments and the confirmation guide that they can then apply and attain their relevant competency card. So it is a meaningful, purposeful document and process, but it does not form part of the qualification. It still has a very high level of importance. Is the evidence IQA? Now, this might not be a term that you're familiar with. IQA is internal quality assurance. Now, this is a process in which colleges will implement this when assessments have been complete. So they'll have a quality process, i.e. internal quality assurance, also known as internal verification, where they will have a team of IQAs or IVs that will essentially check that all the assessment processes have been followed and that there's sufficient evidence in the documented evidence. The IQA will also be the final sign-off essentially for the learner to go to their final assessment. And the last question, when can evidence gathering commence? So ideally, learners should really start gathering evidence when they are in a position of consistently working at or above the criteria set out in the occupational competency statements. But what we would also say on that, please don't miss an opportunity for the apprentices and for the learners to gather evidence, because nobody knows when the next opportunity to obtain that evidence is going to come along, depending on the nature of work that they undertake with yourself. So obviously the learner needs to be demonstrating certainly effective skills and be working consistently at a good industry standard and as the criteria set in the occupational competency statements. But again, please don't miss an opportunity to attain that evidence also. I'm now going to reintroduce my colleague David, who's going to cover some of the questions that we may have had as I've been going through them and throughout the webinar.
Thank you very much, Jason. We've had a couple of questions. So the first one was, will we send the slide deck after this webinar? Yes, I believe it goes out direct from our marketing team, but I've put in the customer@sittinghills.com email address. If you don't receive it, please drop an email on to them, and we'll also try and remember to chase that up as well. The next question, probably for you, Jason, on the construction side. There are apprentices who have completed up to a level 2 MVQ and a diploma who are transferring on to the new level 3. So which part of the qualification will be required to complete, as this is the new one they'll be transferring on to?
Yeah, so as part of this, the learners will be exempt from the core qualification because they have to successfully pass their level 2 MVQ and diploma and all the assessments that's contained within it. And by doing that, learners will be exempt from the core, so they will only be responsible for the level 3 qualification then, and all of the assessments that's contained within it. So they will still have to do test 1 and test 2, as well as the practical project and the professional discussion. The duration of that apprenticeship, again, you may want to discuss that with the providers. That type of scenario wasn't included in previous slides. But a typical duration of what some colleges are saying is that a learner would be on approximately 12 to 18 months if they've previously completed a level 2 apprenticeship, which included an NVQ and diploma, and they're transferring on to a level 3. So essentially no different than what happened previously. These new qualifications aren't there to, consistently keep extending apprenticeship journeys. These are about raising standards and practices and meeting the skills for Wales needs. So yes, I know that might have gone around the houses a bit, but hopefully that clears that up for you. So, have a discussion with the provider with regards to the duration. The provider will be aware that if the learner has previously done a level 2 apprenticeship, that they will be exempt from the core qualification and that they will only be required to complete the level 3 and their assessments. They will still have to complete the employer confirmation guide though, because ultimately, if, for example, it's carpentry or brickwork, the learner will not be able to attain a gold card without evidencing that they've met the level 3 requirements. So just to put that into perspective, and hopefully that answers that for you.
Thank you very much, Jason. And the second one is, or the next one, what is the timeline for the apprenticeship? I can probably start to answer that and then pass it back over to Jason. It would depend on the trade areas. Not all the trade areas are identical in duration. So it really does depend on the trade area and the starting points and how the provider wants to break up some of the sections of this. Because if you had a new learner on the apprenticeship, they would also have to do the core qualification. So you may work with a centre who aim to deliver this in year 1 and then progress on to the level 3. Or you may work with a centre who want to do a couple of units of the core in each of the 3 years, if it's delivered over 3 years. Plumbing and electrical are likely to be 4 years. Some of the other trades are likely to be 3 years. But I don't know if you can add any more to that, Jason?
No, I think what's important to recognise is essentially the trades haven't changed. Learners won't lay bricks differently, cut timber, or paint walls or apply plaster, etc., any differently. The assessment methodology is slightly changed, and some of the outline content is slightly changed. So with regards to timelines, obviously these commence from August, September this year. With regard to durations, again, it depends on the learner's entry point with regard to their prior achievements, as we showcased in the slides earlier. So if you're going to take on a learner who's maybe been at college for the past year doing the foundation qualification, then obviously their time with you as an apprentice can be reduced in recognition of their prior achievements, and they will certainly be exempt from the core qualification also. So, you know, if you're looking for a, you know, 2.5 year apprenticeship, that's probably more realistic for a learner who's done a foundation qualification. And then likewise, if you've had a learner that's, you know, it's impossible really. They can't have done the foundation and progression because they've only been launched for 12 months. So if it's this time next year and you could potentially be looking at taking on a learner who's done both the foundation and progression, again, that duration would reduce. But it doesn't reduce 12 months just because they've been in college for 12 months. You know, you've got to put it in perspective that the learners do need access to site time. So if they've done a foundation and progression, it's likely and realistic that they could potentially do a 2-year apprenticeship, you know, which will give them that 24 months in the workplace, you know, applying the skills that they've learned in college into a vocational setting to you know, continue their practice and making sure that they're proficient and competent in their chosen trade area. So the timeline for apprenticeships isn't something that's kind of set in stone. You know, we do, you know, provide a guide like what we've shown you, but essentially the duration of the apprenticeship is agreed between yourselves as the employers and the providers. With regard to the assessments, again, they're not in set assessment windows like what we have in other qualifications. These are flexible assessments. You know, the exams can be taken at any point. The practical project needs to be taken towards the end, but again, before the professional discussion. And with regard to the evidence gathering, that will be continuous throughout their apprenticeship. So I hope that helps answer that question. Our advice will be to certainly, you know, have a look at your potential apprentices' entry point and their prior learning, and then have that discussion with the training provider, who will probably do a robust initial assessment of that learner also, because we do know that through recent GCSE results and stuff, learners' entry points may not be as first perceived. So, you know, that's also that a lot of providers and employers are also taking that into consideration. But it's fantastic that we've got employers on tonight, and employers that are committed to taking on apprentices and certainly supporting the industry in Wales and the skills for Wales needs. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Jason. So there's no other questions coming in. We won't make you stay on a nice summer evening any longer than you need to. But if you've got any other questions, please do type away, or please do follow up on the skillsforwales.customer@sittinggirls.com email address. And also, please do have a look at the chat and complete the webinar surveys, please, if you could. So they're really helpful to get your thoughts, your understanding, where you think you'll require support. All the information that's really useful for us. And just good luck with it, really. Good luck with the experience. There's been a lot of work gone on through the review, through QW, through ourselves in the consortium, to try and create a modern, fit-for-purpose qualification and an apprenticeship for the learners and for the industries. And both Jason and myself are from the industry, so we're very passionate about creating a relevant and appropriate qualification. So we hope you have a very positive experience of this qualification, and please stay in touch. Any other queries, please follow them up with us. But we do appreciate you taking the time to come on to this webinar. And if there's no final questions, just once again, big thank you to Jason for the presentation and for everyone for attending. So any final words, Jason?
No, just to echo what you've said yourself, David, just the best of luck with everybody. Thank you very much for attending. And yeah, please do get in touch if we can support in any way. And also thank you to you, David, for your support with this webinar.
Thanks all. Have a great evening, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.